He called me at 6:43 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching the light come up over the backyard. It was my son-in-law. He said my daughter had left. He said she'd taken the baby and some bags and that he didn't know where she'd gone. His voice was flat, the way a person sounds when they've rehearsed the words so many times they've forgotten how to make them feel anything. I said, "I know where she is." He went quiet. I hung up. She'd called me the night before, around 11. I almost didn't answer. I'd been in bed, reading, and my phone was on the nightstand. And when I saw her name, I felt that particular kind of dread that settles in your chest before you even know what's wrong. The kind your body knows before your mind does. "Mom," she said. That was all. Just that one word, and I was already sitting up, already reaching for my glasses. Her name is Lily. She's 34 years old, and she has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and she married a man named Conrad Whitmore 6 years ago in a garden ceremony outside Asheville, North Carolina. And I smiled through the whole thing, even though something in the back of my mind had been whispering since the rehearsal dinner. I should have listened to that whisper. "Mom, I need to leave tonight." I asked her where she was. She said she was in the nursery, sitting on the floor with the baby asleep on her chest, keeping her voice low so he wouldn't hear her from the other end of the house. Their house. His family's house. Technically. Though no one had ever said that out loud while Lily was in the room, she told me what had happened. Conrad's mother, a woman I will call what she called herself, which was simply Mrs. Whitmore, even to her grandchild's other grandmother, even at Christmas, had spent the past 3 years quietly and methodically dismantling my daughter's life. It started small. A comment about the way Lily kept the house, a suggestion offered in that particular tone that sounds like concern but lands like a verdict that Lily might want to reconsider going back to work after the baby, a slow, careful rearrangement of the weekly schedule until Conrad's family dinners were non-negotiable and Lily's friendships had somehow become inconvenient. Then, 6 months ago, it stopped being small. Lily had been working as a project manager at a mid-size architecture firm in Charlotte. She was good at her job. She'd been promoted twice in 4 years, but Mrs. Whitmore had connections in that industry. Her late husband had been a commercial developer, and over a period of weeks that Lily only pieced together afterward, she'd made certain calls. She hadn't done anything overtly illegal. She'd simply mentioned to the right people that Lily was struggling, distracted, that the baby wasn't sleeping, that Conrad was worried. The firm let Lily go in February. "Restructuring," they said. "We're eliminating your position." They gave her 6 weeks of severance and a form letter. Lily came home that afternoon and Mrs. Whitmore was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, and she looked at my daughter and said, "Well, now you can focus on what matters." Conrad said nothing. He stood by the refrigerator and he said nothing. It was 6 months ago. In the time since Lily's name had been removed from the joint checking account, a new account had been opened in Conrad's name, where his direct deposits now went. Lily's debit card had been declined at the grocery store in March. Conrad said it was a bank error. In April, Mrs. Whitmore began taking the baby. His name is Samuel. He is 14 months old, to her house in Myers Park for what she called grandmother days. And those days had gotten longer, and the notice had gotten shorter. And twice Lily had called to say she was coming to pick him up, and Mrs. Whitmore had said Conrad had already said it was fine for him to stay the night. Conrad had already said, "Mom, Lily told me that night on the phone," her voice barely above a breath. "I have nothing. I have no job, no money, and she has my son half the time, and I don't even know how that happened. I told her to pack what she could carry. I told her to get Samuel. I told her I was on my way. The drive from my house in Raleigh to Charlotte is about 2.5 hours in normal traffic. I left at midnight. I pulled into their neighborhood at 2:37 in the morning, and I sat at the end of the street for 4 minutes, just breathing, because I needed to be steady. Not angry, steady. Lily came out the front door with Samuel strapped to her chest and a rolling carry-on and a diaper bag, and she looked like someone who had been running for a very long time and had just realized they could stop. She got in the car. She didn't look back at the house. I pulled away from the curb slowly, the way you do when you don't want to wake anyone, and we drove north on I-85 in the dark. She fell asleep somewhere around Kannapolis. Samuel slept the whole way. I drove with the radio off and the heat up, and I thought about what I knew that my daughter didn't. I had been building the file for 8 months. It started the previous October after Thanksgiving. We'd all been at Conrad's parents' house. His father had passed by then, and it was just Mrs. Whitmore presiding over the table, and I'd watched that woman speak to my daughter for 4 hours, and I'd counted exactly 3 times that Lily had tried to finish a sentence and been talked over. And I'd watched Conrad laugh at something his mother said while Lily cleared plates that weren't hers to clear. I drove home that night and I called my attorney. Her name is Veronica, and she has been my attorney for 11 years, and she is the kind of woman who listens to everything before she says anything. I told her what I'd observed. I told her I was worried. She told me that if Lily ever wanted to pursue anything legally, documentation would matter enormously. She told me to write things down. Dates, times, what was said, who was present. I bought a small notebook the next day. I started writing, but I want to back up, because there is something about me that Conrad Whitmore and his mother had decided on their own without asking, and that assumption is the reason I could afford to stay patient. I am 63 years old. I retired at 58. Before I retired, I spent 26 years in commercial real estate law, the last 11 as a senior partner at a firm in Raleigh that handled property transactions, lease disputes, and corporate acquisitions across the Southeast. I built that career from nothing. My mother was a seamstress. My father drove a delivery truck. I paid for law school myself, over 8 years, going part-time while I worked at a title company. I know what a deed looks like. I know what a lease says. I know what a default clause means. Conrad's family knew that Lily's mother was some kind of retired lawyer. That was approximately the depth of their interest. What they did not know was that 19 years ago, through a client relationship I'd developed during a complicated estate dispute, I had acquired a partial stake in a real estate investment trust that held commercial properties across Mecklenburg County. I'd bought into it quietly, reinvested every distribution, and over 2 decades that stake had grown considerably. When I retired, I had the trust restructured and took on a more direct management role. The Whitmore family's primary business, a luxury home renovation and design firm that Mrs. Whitmore had built on the foundation of her husband's developer connections, operated out of a suite of offices on Providence Road in Charlotte. A beautiful building, very visible. The kind of address that signals to clients that you are established and serious. They had been leasing that space for 11 years from a holding company that was, if you followed the paperwork carefully, controlled by the trust of which I was the managing partner. I had known this for approximately 8 months by the time I drove down to Charlotte in the middle of the night to collect my daughter. I had said nothing. I had simply watched and written things down and waited and made sure Veronica had everything she needed. The morning after Lily arrived at my house, Conrad called. I let it go to voicemail. Mrs. Whitmore called 2 hours after that. I let that go to voicemail too. Lily sat at my kitchen table and nursed Samuel and I made her scrambled eggs, and we didn't talk about any of it yet because she was exhausted and she needed to eat before she needed to think. By noon, Conrad had sent 3 text messages, each one escalating slightly in tone. The last one said, "I think we need to discuss the situation with Samuel's living arrangements." I read it over Lily's shoulder. She looked at me. She said, "What do I do?" I said, "Nothing yet. Let me make a call." Veronica had been anticipating exactly this. She'd already spoken with a family law attorney in Charlotte, a woman named Gail who came highly recommended and who specialized in precisely these kinds of cases where financial control had been used as a tool of isolation. We had the documentation, we had records of the account changes. We had the timeline Lily had given me over the past months, cross-referenced against dates I'd noted in my own notebook. We had emails Lily had saved without knowing why, just a habit, the kind of thing you do when something feels wrong even if you can't say exactly what. We filed first. Before Conrad's family had any idea we were ready to file anything. The emergency custody motion went in on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, a family court judge in Mecklenburg County had issued a temporary order establishing that Samuel would remain in Lily's care pending a full hearing and requiring that any changes to that arrangement be approved by the court. Conrad called 17 times that afternoon. I picked up on the 18th. He said, "You can't do this." I said, "It's already done." He said his mother was going to make things very difficult. He said they had resources. He said things could get complicated for Lily if she tried to fight them. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Conrad, I need you to write down a name. Are you ready? It's the name of the company that holds the lease on your mother's building on Providence Road. I'd like you to look it up." Silence. I told him the name of the holding company. I told him that if he wanted to verify the ownership structure, he was welcome to pull the Mecklenburg County property records, which are public. More silence. "I've been managing that trust for a long time," I said. "Your family's lease comes up for renewal in 4 months. I haven't made any decisions about that yet, but I've been thinking about it." I wasn't threatening him. I want to be precise about that. I was informing him. There is a difference, and it matters, and I have always believed that the clearest power is the kind you don't have to raise your voice to use. He said he needed to talk to his mother. I said that was probably a good idea. The next 3 weeks were not easy. I want to be honest about that, because these stories sometimes get told as if the moment you play your cards, everything smooths out, and that is not how it works. Conrad hired an attorney. Mrs. Whitmore hired a PR consultant, which I found fascinating. There were some ugly messages. There was a period of about 10 days where Lily barely slept, where she second-guessed herself constantly, where she sat on my back porch in the evenings and cried in a way that was quiet and exhausted rather than loud. The kind of crying that happens when you've been holding it together for so long that you've forgotten the weight of it. I sat with her most of those evenings. I didn't tell her it would be fine. I don't make promises I can't control. I told her that she had done the hardest part, which was leaving, and that everything else we would handle one piece at a time. Samuel learned to pull himself up to standing during those 3 weeks. He did it first at my coffee table, grabbing the edge and hauling himself upright with enormous concentration, and then looking around like he couldn't believe he'd managed it. Lily laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes out before you decide to, and I thought, there it is. There's the part they couldn't take. The custody hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in May. I wore the gray suit I used to wear to closings, which is perhaps a strange thing to notice, but I noticed it. Gail was methodical and thorough, and she presented the financial documentation in a way that was calm and clear and very, very hard to argue with. Conrad's attorney tried. He framed it as a family disagreement, a difficult adjustment period, a matter of different parenting philosophies. The judge was not particularly moved by that framing. She awarded primary custody to Lily. She established a structured visitation schedule for Conrad. She noted in her comments that the evidence suggested a pattern of financial control that was concerning, and she referred the matter to a family services coordinator for a follow-up review. Conrad looked at me when the judge finished speaking. I don't know what he was looking for. The lease negotiation happened separately, through the appropriate channels. I retained a property manager to handle the communication with Mrs. Whitmore's firm, as I typically do. The new terms reflected current market rates, which in that area of Charlotte had shifted considerably since the original agreement. Mrs. Whitmore had the option to accept the new terms or to locate alternative space. Lily got her own apartment in Charlotte in June, near a good park, in a neighborhood she'd always liked. I helped her paint the bedroom. Samuel's room is yellow. He has strong opinions about the mobile above his crib and will remove it and hand it to the nearest adult if he finds it unsatisfactory, which I find completely reasonable. Lily is working again. She found a position at a smaller firm. Fewer people, more interesting projects, a manager who had actually read her portfolio before the interview. She told me last month that she'd had the best week at work she could remember in years. Conrad has his scheduled visits. He shows up on time, which I think is the least that can be said. Whether he and Lily will ever fully untangle what happened between them is not my concern. That's for the two of them and, honestly, probably a therapist. Mrs. Whitmore's firm signed the new lease. I think about that sometimes. I think about the 11 years she spent in that office, walking past the front desk and looking at her name on the directory and feeling, I imagine, very certain of her place in things. I think about the call she made to Lily's firm, the words she chose, the careful way she must have positioned herself as concerned rather than calculated. I think about my daughter sitting on the floor of a nursery in the dark, keeping her voice to a whisper, saying, I have nothing. She was wrong about that. She just didn't know yet what she had. I learned something a long time ago in 26 years of watching people fight over land and money and what they believed was theirs by right. The people who rely on what they can take from others are always, eventually, surprised to find out what they never actually owned. The ones who build quietly, who document and wait and move only when the moment is right, they are the ones who are still standing when the room goes quiet. I raised my daughter to be strong. I just didn't expect she'd need me to show her what that looked like first. I'm glad I was ready when she did. I keep coming back to the moment Lily walked out of that front door. 2 bags, a baby strapped to her chest, and a face that looked like someone who had already decided to stop apologizing for existing. I've thought about what it takes to reach that moment. Not the leaving. The leaving is actually the easy part, once you've made the decision. What takes everything out of a person is the years before it. The small erosions, the way Conrad would stand by the refrigerator and say nothing. The way his mother would smile while she dismantled. People like that count on the fact that each individual moment looks small. One comment, one canceled dinner, one account quietly moved out of your name. Taken separately, none of it looks like what it is. Taken together, it is the whole architecture of someone's cage. Lily is a good person. I mean that in the specific way, not as a compliment, but as a description. She thinks about how her actions affect other people. She gives the benefit of the doubt longer than she should. She stayed in that marriage partly because she didn't want to be wrong about the man she'd chosen, and partly because she was raised to work through hard things rather than walk away from them. That's her character. And people like Conrad's mother are very good at finding people like Lily, because goodness, without the armor to protect it, can be used against you. That's the thing I want to say most clearly. Having good values is not enough on its own. I watched my daughter be kind and patient and hardworking for 6 years, and none of those qualities protected her. because she hadn't yet learned to pair them with something harder. The willingness to study a situation clearly, document what she saw, and act on the evidence rather than the hope. I'm not criticizing her. I didn't fully learn that myself until I'd been practicing law for almost a decade. It took losing a case I should have won because I trusted the other side's good faith when I should have been reading the fine print to understand that clear thinking is not coldness. It is care applied carefully. It is the most serious thing you can offer the people who depend on you. What I did over those 8 months, the notebook, the calls to Veronica, the quiet accounting of what I owned and what they assumed. None of that came from anger. Anger would have moved too fast. Anger would have called Conrad's mother the November after Thanksgiving and said something satisfying and utterly useless. What I felt was more like a long, steady resolve. I knew what was happening to my daughter. I knew I had the tools to help her, and I knew that the only way those tools would work was if I used them at exactly the right moment, not a day sooner. That steadiness, the ability to keep going when nothing visible is happening yet, to trust the process even when Lily was crying on my back porch and I had no guarantee of how the hearing would go, that is the part no one talks about enough. It's not dramatic. It doesn't make for a good scene, but it is the whole game. Samuel pulled himself up to standing at my coffee table. He grabbed the edge and hauled himself upright and looked around the room like he couldn't believe what he'd done. And Lily laughed. That laugh, real, sudden, completely unguarded, told me more about her recovery than anything else could have. She was still in there. She had never actually been gone. I raised her to be strong. I just had to remind her what that looked like, one morning at a time, until she could see it in herself again,